We're talking today about scientific publishing. Now, very often I will wave around a journal like this when I'm talking with you. And this particular one, Nature, costs £10 per volume. And people are happy to pay that, in part because the first third of this is full of scientific journalism. So you get news reports from all around the world, you get profiles of scientists, and you get all sorts of updates. But not all journals have this. In fact, most journals are just an editorial followed by research papers. And that's fine, but it's maybe not something that you want to personally pay a lot of money for. And yet, if you as a member of the public go onto the website of a journal, you will almost certainly hit a paywall and be asked to pay quite a significant sum of money, maybe 3 or 4 times what one of these volumes costs, to access one research article. And most scholars think that people are being charged too much to read research that is largely funded by the taxpayer anyway. So what do journal publishers do to justify the amount of money that they charge? Well, first of all, they don't pay for the writing of the paper. They don't pay for the research that underpins the paper, and they don't pay for editing services on that journal. All of this is supplied by usually universities and the funding bodies, so in other words, the taxpayer. What journal publishers do is typeset the end result, so they make it look pretty, and they host it, so they put it on their webpage. And in the past, they would have printed the papers out, and that still happens, but the most common way of accessing papers now is via the web. Now, of course, typesetting the paper and hosting it does involve some costs, so it's perfectly legitimate that publishers charge some amount, but most scholars think that they are charging too much. So the way this works is that journal publishers will bundle dozens of different journals together and sell a subscription to a university library, and the sums that we are talking about are hundreds of thousands of pounds. And that's money that could be spent on more research. And that's the scandal of this. That's what most researchers think, that research funding that could be spent on generating more papers, generating more research, is being diverted to these for-profit companies. Now, if researchers believe that too much money is being spent on access to these journals, why is it allowed to go on? Well, researchers do need access to the journals, but you would imagine that there would be some sort of negotiation, some sort of pressure being put on the publishers to charge less. Now, there is a resistance movement, but it's not coming mainly from where you would expect it to come from. So you would want, as a taxpayer, for your university librarians to be pushing back against these big fees. But they are not incentivized to do so. So if you are a university librarian and you manage a university library budget of £5 million, you're not really going to want to go to a publisher and argue that you should be in charge of a budget of £4 million. In fact, you're wanting to go the other way. You want to be in charge of a bigger budget, not a smaller budget, because you are being judged by your employer and by the marketplace that you work within on how big your budget is. So you want more, not less. So you're not really incentivized to go out and argue with publishers that the budget should be reduced. The resistance movement that does exist is led mostly by researchers, and some researchers have tried to boycott certain publishers. And I'll put a link down at the bottom somewhere for more information about that. But what we're talking about today is one particular person who has had enough. A Kazakhstani computer science graduate called Alexandra Elbakyan, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, has set up a website, quite a famous website in physical sciences, but it's less well known in social sciences, called SCIHub. And SCIHub works exactly how you would want access to journals to work. You go to a single point, the SCIHub website, you type in the details of the paper that you want to read. Usually it's just the title or maybe the document identifier. Click the button and it appears. There's no paywall, there's no login, there's no fuss of any kind. And because of that convenience, it turns out that many researchers who do have legitimate access to these journal articles choose to use SCIHub, which is not a legal service, to access the same content. Now, SCIHub is appreciated in the science community, even though people realise that it's illegal. Now, this isn't primarily a video about the morality of what Alexandra Elbakyan has done. Some people see her as a hero, and certainly she has provided access to researchers in the developing world who wouldn't have access otherwise. But what we want to talk about is what legally could be done to facilitate access. Well, if scholars are writing and editing the papers unpaid, and the publishers are only typesetting and hosting them, it would seem that there is an opportunity for a web company, someone like Google, to put together tools that would largely automate the typesetting and tools to allow editors to publish journals. And as soon as those were available, scholars, researchers in universities who are editors could take their journal away from the publisher and publish exactly the same content using exactly the same procedures on the service provided by, for instance, Google. Maybe there's a journal of fancy social science published by publisher XYZ. The editor of the journal could change the journal to be the new journal of fancy social science, so give it a slightly different name and publish it on this new service. And when services like that are used and their use becomes widespread, then access to research results will be the way that most researchers think that it should be. Completely free, completely open to everyone on the planet. And there you have it. That's how publishing works. Bye-bye.